because of its closing question. It implores those who read or listen to interrogate themselves. Tell me, what is it you will do with what your one wild and precious life? I think that we who have heard the question are better for it, but it is a little bit jarring. It has this singularity to it, the way that Mary Oliver wants me to answer for my one life, as though I were all alone out here in the world, responsible for getting it right. Standing alone, this question is a little bit confronting, and so I love to read the context of the poem so that we have an opportunity to know the real gentleness of this question and what Mary Oliver means by the one wild and precious life. I think that it's not that our life is this singular resource that we alone must find proper ways to make use of, but rather we are shown through the poem that there is this world of mystery and wonder and connection that is out there waiting for us. We are blessed to have this gift of life, these precious hours, and in the best of circumstances, some measure of freedom to choose what we will do with them. Most importantly, let us not dare to think for a minute that we are actually on our own out here. Before we are asked the question, we meet the grasshopper. There is this sweet being who reminds us that these questions are not abstract. When Mary Oliver is awed by the world, the particularity of it matters. Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. With this line, we are snapped out of distant contemplation and are invited into a moment of direct encounter with another. In this place of direct encounter, there is unknown, there is risk, and there is the holiness of relationality. This is what I'm here to talk about this morning. The spiritual practice of encountering others with awe and reverence, loving the particularities of our lives and those we find ourselves sharing our life with. I'm in this season of thinking quite deeply about community and home and what it all means to me. I just turned 28, which means that I have been an adult for a full decade, and I think it is a common story for many people of my generation that I have spent all of these 10 years on the move, transitioning from one educational program to another, working seasonal jobs and short-term internships, and watching with amazement and also a bit of grief as my life and my loved ones become scattered throughout the world. And it's a contrast. It's a big contrast for me because I spent the first 18 years of my life, so up until a decade ago, in one house, a sweet little place in the woods in North Carolina, in the Piedmont region. It's the house where my parents still live. And since then, I've moved 13 or 14 times, depending on how you count it. I've accumulated personal ties in Asheville, Boston, Durham, Washington, D.C., the village of Ramgarh in northern India, Portland, Paris, and now Seattle. And I'm so lucky. It's a privilege to have pieces of my heart in so many places, but there is a downside as well. I am trying so hard not to get in the habit of touching down for just a brief moment, only to leave again. I don't want to treat this life like an endless search for greener pastures, this climb of upward mobility. And I have this fear because sometimes when I have my eye on the next move, there's this barrier to connection that I put up between myself and the people around me. Knowing the grief that comes with leaving beloveds, especially after experiencing it so many times, it's easier sometimes to stay on the surface level, to cease to be really open to experiencing the full depth of those relationships. For me, this is a season, this maybe next 10 years, this is a season of learning to stay still for a while, to outstretch my hand and offer it to whoever is willing to leap out of the meadow to know me. And maybe this is relatable to your life experience, maybe it isn't, we all have different lives. But I think the common kernel here is this mistake of spending too much time in a fantasy that we might be happier in some other place, some other time, with some other company, especially on our more difficult days. If this feels like a folly of yours, I invite you to work on it with me. Rather than spending our time wondering where we might go to find better company, can we get curious about what we can discover when we deepen with the people already around us? How might we adjust our vision to better see and appreciate those humans that we share a household with, or a neighborhood, or classroom, or workplace, or church? It feels vulnerable to share that this is something that I struggle with, that I have these days of disconnection or judgment or trouble really seeing and appreciating the people in my life. I know I have dear friends around me, but there are times when this lonely part of me itches with the thought that maybe I still haven't found my people. I have judgmental days. I latch onto annoyance with someone who interrupts me too often, or the friend who gets overly anxious that everything has to go according to plan, and I find it hard to relax around them. Or sometimes I have those friends who seem uninterested in speaking about anything with any real depth. On my worst days, it's me who creates this sense of separation between me and someone else. I use the term friend as an example, but this could be anyone in our lives. It is so easy to dwell in pettiness and judgment as we go about our day. But isn't every single person in this world a living, breathing miracle? If we Unitarian Universalists declare that every person has inherent worth and dignity, then I think we have a responsibility to practice really feeling it and living into it. The currents of humanism in our living tradition should call us to appreciate the goodness of the human spirit, not only in the vast and general, but also in the particular. This is important spiritual work because it is very difficult. I think of this experience that some Christian clergy have described that gets at what I'm talking about a little bit. When offering communion to congregants, there is this rare and precious moment where these pastors are overcome with love for the people that they are giving communion to. They become overwhelmed by the unique and indivisible beauty, strength, and vulnerability of the person in front of them. As they offer bread and a cup and a blessing, they feel like they can see their congregants through the eyes of God. They know that their God created these precious humans and loves them so much. In these cases, the ritual is sacred because it reminds the participants of the inherent holiness already dwelling in their midst. And through our connection with each other, you can feel this holiness. And I should note, I don't believe that the priests are able to experience this because they are closer to God. They just have the right position from which to see it. This is such a sweet example, and it's powerful. And I want to focus here a minute. It's become so easy in our world to preach a message of love and talk about our common humanity. And it's great that we live in a time and culture where we hear these kinds of messages quite often, if we're lucky. But I don't want us to keep it at the intellectual. I want us to feel it deep down in our bones with every cell of our body. It's a call that is hard to take seriously. To get by in our day-to-day, we have to move quickly. We have to get our work done, follow proper social norms. It is hard to get still enough to really behold the miracle of the person that is in front of you. And maybe that's not how your boss or barista wants to be looked at, so there's things to tease out here. I imagine that some of you who have been in caring professions or raised children have had lots of opportunities for this kind of beholding. It's these glimpses of the holy in another person that can change us and help us feel more alive. Sometimes that intimate relationship gives us a better glimpse. This is what the Jewish humanist philosopher Martin Buber calls the I-thou relationship. He's famous for writing about it. You can read a lot about him. There's lots of interpretations of his work out there. Here's my attempt at summarizing him. As we go through our lives, I just closed out my screen. As we go through our lives, we spend most of our time in a mundane mode of being. As Buber puts it, we mainly interact with the world and everything in it on a material plane. As in, interactions are about taking in sense data. We extract knowledge from that data, and everything and everyone around us therefore becomes objects, giving us data. This is called the I-it relationship, this default mode. It's not inherently bad. It's pretty normal. It's how we get through our lives. But it is limited and a bit lonely if that's all we ever experience. In I-it relating, we regard a tree as a collection of its colors and shapes, or we know something about the biological organism that our language calls tree, or even this particular species, and we interpret it through these lenses. However we see the tree, it is often still an object. It is an it in relation to ourselves. But sometimes there are these fleeting moments when we can encounter another through an I-thou relationship. The figure of thou in relation to the I is not a mere object, but a being that is wholly distinct and complete. We know that they have a spirit that cannot be reduced to just the sense data through which we interpret them. To regard another as a thou is an acknowledgement that we can experience the otherness of the other and all that they hold. The tree ceases to be just a tree or a collection of its parts. There's this quote, he's talking about this metaphor of the tree. It can, however, also come about if I have both will and grace, that in considering the tree I become bound up in relationship with it. Everything belonging to the tree is united in this event. Its form and structure, its colors and chemical composition, its intercourse with the elements and with the stars are all present in a single whole. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no value depending on my mood, but it is bodied and separate from me, and it has to do with me, and I with it. This is the I-thou. It has to do with me, and I it, even though we are wholly other and whole universes to ourselves. For Buber, the meaning of life is found in our I-thou relating, and he encourages all of us to cultivate this lens so that we can live responsibly with those around us. To put it simply, if we have both will and grace, we can see other humans in this way too. In this understanding, systems of oppression come about when those in power insist on relating to others with an I-it positionality. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quotes Buber in his letter from a Birmingham jail because he's explaining that segregation is rooted at its core in a sinful relegation of people to things. This false sense of objectification and an unwillingness to behold the irreducibility of others needs to be overcome if we are to right injustice. We see this in our destruction of the environment. We see the ecosystems around us for what we can extract from them. We do not have the ability in the I-it relationship with the environment to honor the wholeness of all the beings within them that cannot be contained or constrained by the purpose they serve to humans. This is why injustice, environmental, social justice, environmental or social injustice, is a primarily spiritual problem. So we have a responsibility to try. We must learn to see the grasshopper. This grasshopper, I mean, and understand that the grasshopper can see us too. So how do we actually and practically take on this spiritual practice? I'm not sure that there is a perfect formula, but I'll share what I think of. First, I think that there are simple and well-known ways that we can practice treating those around us with love and respect, like giving those we spend time with the best of our attention. We practice really listening, avoiding distractions, doing what we can to show we care. Then there are hospitality practices. In cases where those apply, when we are lucky enough to host someone else, we make sure that their needs are accounted for and they become a thou. We give them the best plate of food. We do not let their cup run dry. When we share what we have with another, we are saying that they are important and their being deserves sustenance and nurturance. Think of a conversation as a practice or hospitality as a practice. And I also think of practices I picked up in my time as a hospital chaplain. These practices helped me honor the thou of the people I was caring for. Each time that I approached a patient's room to be a chaplain, a spiritual care provider, there was this moment of pause outside their door. I would look at my notes one more time so I could be sure I would get their name right. Then I would apply hand sanitizer and breathe, asking Spirit to help me foster a moment of real connection with whoever met me from behind the door. Then I would ask their consent to sit with them for a bit, and if they invited me in, I would ask them to share their story with me. Then for 20 minutes or an hour or more, their story would be my whole world. I was right there with them, this person who had just been a complete stranger. As appropriate to the situation, I would do what I could to reflect back their amazing, beautiful humanness, so that they might catch a glimpse of it too. In the hospital setting, there's this tenderness, this raw humanness that becomes so apparent, and it's so precious. And I would always thank them for their time, and I would know that they weren't the only ones getting sustenance from our time together. In a way, chaplaincy opened me up to see others the way that priests see their parishioners during communion. So vulnerable, so strong, a universe unto themselves and nothing less than beautiful. But someone doesn't need to be in a liminal space like a church or a hospital to catch that glimpse. There are some places where it's just easier to see, but it's everywhere. We always have the opportunity to regard another person as thou instead of it. With people we know well, we might try to look at them and see if we can see something a little bit new. Maybe we've never seen their face from quite this angle, or there's a particular movement they make that we can pay attention to, or the unique ways that they carry their voice in a singular moment. When we are in conflict, this practice is so important. When we are in conflict, can we try to hold another person's humanity alongside the strain in the relationship? What are ways that we can, even if we can't fully let go of our judgments, can we balance them with love? I hope you agree with me that there is richness here. These practices, I hope, will help us to be more compassionate, more connected, and more spiritually grounded. And compassionate, connected, spiritually grounded people are good for the world. It's not just us. I am trying to say that spirituality is so much bigger than just between us and some disconnected holy being out there far away. This one wild and precious life cannot exist without context, without the grasshopper. To truly behold another being, that is spiritual practice at its best. It is not easy, but it can be done by will and grace. Later today, maybe tomorrow or the next day, I want you to take a moment to try. When you are with someone else, whether someone in your household or someone you pass on the street, maybe an animal or plant companion, try to take a brief moment to truly behold them, appreciate them, and feel it in your bones, that they contain multitudes and stardust so vast that you could not begin to take it all in, but yet you try. And yet these multitudes have this precious moment to connect with their multitudes. Your paths have crossed, and that is nothing less than a miracle. If you try this, let me know how it goes. The transcending mystery and wonder is here in this space and all around for all of us. May we take the time to drink it in. Amen. And I will invite you to